Should the no information rule for bass and other leagues be updated? That's what we're going to talk about right now. In this video, we're going to look at the no information rule for the Bassmaster Elites. Why? We've had 2 disqualifications over the last 2 days, Matt Herren and just recently Scott Martin. And I think it's really important for us to not only read the rule, but also talk about if it needs to be updated or adjusted and why this rule was put in place to start off with. Now, we need to be real clear right up front. Last year, there were a lot of rule infractions that happened that as fans, we didn't feel like bass enforced enough. And here we have 2 in the first week that are enforced to the utmost degree, and there is a lot of people that are very unhappy with what happened. If you break a rule, the rules need to be enforced. But maybe there's some things that need to be changed inside the rules so that it isn't such a harsh penalty. At the same time, if they break it, it's got to be enforced. And why does it need to be enforced? It hurts the integrity of the sport and the hobby. And it makes sure that anglers aren't living in the gray area. It doesn't allow anglers to get a competitive advantage by living in that gray area. And it's important that we have the rules set in place. But are they outdated? Now, if you don't know, and we're going to talk about the no information rule, the no information rule was kind of set in place years ago because there were anglers hiring guides, getting waypoints, flying planes over lakes and ponds to find bedding bass. There were all sorts of issues that happened years ago. And they put these rules about no information so that so no one would get a competitive advantage. But these days, social media and technology and all sorts of stuff have helped bring these violations to a forefront. And now we're seeing more of them and learning more of them. And we want transparency as fans. But are these rules outdated? Now, we want to look at both sides, but let's read some of the no information rule. And really, I'm going to focus on C3, A, and J, because those are the ones that they get brought up the most. And I quote, C3, off-limits and practice periods for the Bassmaster Elite will be announced by Bass. Off-limit periods for the Bassmaster Elite events will start Monday, 12:01 local time of each event posted by Bass. There will be a 3-day official period prior to the first competition day of the Elite Series tournaments. Off-limits for Elite events begin on the Monday closest to the 28 days prior to the first practice day. Practice for events not ending in Sunday may start on a different day to be announced by the Bass restrictions. Once the Elite Series schedule is officially announced or a competitor becomes definitely aware of the tournament location, whichever date is earliest, current or qualified elite anglers, regardless of the date, will fall under these restrictions. A. Elite anglers cannot gather waypoints or specific fishing locations, i.e. creek, river, and of the lake, etc., from any source that is not publicly available. Anglers participate in general discussions with fans and others about fishing, especially including boat shows, seminars, and the like. However, they must not use such conversations to intentionally gain a competitive edge for fishing a future elite event. To be safe in these situations, an angler must discontinue conversations that focus on specific locations and other information that might result in a competitive advantage. Elite anglers cannot solicit, gather, or intentionally receive any information to gain a competitive advantage from anyone other than another Elite Series competitor in the tournament. Elite anglers cannot buy or barter any information to gain a competitive advantage. Rule J states, during the 28-day tournament waters off-limit period, elite anglers must continue to adhere to the no information rules and are prohibited from being on the tournament waters unless approved by tournament officials. There shall be no exceptions. For the first offense of an intentional violation of the off-limits period or no information rule at any time, the competitor shall be disqualified from the tournament and assessed up to a $10,000 fine. For the second offense, the competitor will lose their eligibility for the following year Elite Series and will be assessed up to a $25,000 fine. A self-reported unintentional violation of off-limits will result in disqualification only. Any contestant accused in writing of violating the off-limits and no information rule to tournament officials may be subject to a credibility assessment relevant to the charges. Accuser may also be required to take a credibility assessment. Failure to pass the credibility assessment may result in disqualification from the tournaments. So how can these be updated? Well, first off, there needs to be more put in there about different topics that do still happen. There is this, I wouldn't even say conspiracy theory. There are anglers these days that find out where the permits are being pulled for certain bodies of water. Then they realize that they have an opportunity to find those permits and go fish those waters. This should be added into the rules right off the bat. This is an infraction and a violation that should get the angler immediately disqualified. This happens. It's not something that people like to talk about. It happens. And it shouldn't. And if an angler does that, they should be immediately disqualified, because that is giving them a real big competitive advantage. So we saw that Scott Martin self-reported himself, which is great. Kudos to him. However, in the rules it says that you can only be disqualified. And we have learned that not only was he disqualified, but he had a fine. So there's still more information that we're not being told. If you're out there talking or in public and someone comes up and starts bragging to you about what's going on, the angler should tell that fan or person, stop talking to me about what's going on. You're going to get me in trouble. But then, if it does happen, it needs to be reported that second. Fans coming up and giving information happens to all of these anglers, because when you meet your hero, you're going to brag about how great of a fisherman you are. And at times, that only hurts the angler. And the angler needs to make sure that not only does he tell you to be quiet, which is probably kind of embarrassing or puts that angler in a tough situation, but they also need to make sure they do what's right for themselves. So I think there's something that needs to be added into the rules for cases like that. I think if they call right away and self-report, that it should be just washed. But when you wait 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, or when the tournament's happening and it happens, I think then a disqualification and or fine should be assessed. I think there's lots of problems that happen every year in all of the organizations, and we've seen more and more happen with Bass. But Bass is trying to do their best to enforce the rules, because we want transparency and we want to know what's happening. I think the anglers also want to know. I think it's very important that if an angler violates a rule, that not only do all of the anglers know, but also the fans. Because the one thing Bass and MLF and MPFL and all of the organizations are going to do at all times is they're going to try to protect the angler. They don't want to disparage or discredit an angler. That's not their job. That's not what they want to do. And they'd rather keep it in-house and then nothing happen. But the problem is that when it starts to build up, when it's unloaded, it's a really big deal. And you're watching this video, and I understand that you're Matt Herren and Scott Martin are your fans of them. I am too. But we also need to make sure that we back Bass a little bit more, because they're enforcing the rules that we want to see enforced. And we don't want someone to be way above somebody else. We don't want to have a competitive advantage for this angler and not that angler. And we have to remember that. But there are things that probably need to be looked at by a committee of not only anglers, but outside people that can go, this rule doesn't make sense. Or maybe we can update this rule just a little bit so it makes more sense for all the anglers and makes a fair playing field. You don't want the goalpost to move from over here to over here. You want the goalpost to be right down the middle. And while it's hard to look inward and to go, there's a problem, It's better to resolve the problem as soon as possible and work together to make it right for all of the anglers. And hopefully this is something that can be seen and heard, and you guys can comment below and tell me what you think. So comment below and tell me what you think. I need to give props to my boy Chad Hoover. He has the Chad Hoover kayak fishing show and everything else. He's the king of kayak fishing. He gave me some constructive criticism, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you, Chad. You're my boy. Hopefully you like this kind of content, and if you do, click that like and subscribe button, become part of the team and family, and thank you. Thanks to all the new subscribers, all the new members, all the people who are interactive on the channel. I really appreciate y'all. It's awesome. We're having a fantastic month, so thank you. But if you're not a subscriber, click that button. It's free, it's easy, and you're doing me a favor, so thank you. Friday nights we go live, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're free, come join us. Remember, take your kid fishing, tight lines, cheers, and get your fish on.